Well, hello and welcome to the Riverfront Reds Show. And the Reds are playing so well in spring training. Joel Luckhaupt, welcome. I decided to get a little dressed up tonight.
You're so fancy.
Yeah, I'm so excited about Matt McLain. What can I say? I tell myself all winter, don't get too excited about spring training. And then here they go. The Elly and McLain show is back up and running. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I said, I mean, obviously there are lots of things they needed, but I said most of the offseason that getting Matt McLain back and having him be healthy, which, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves.
Yes.
Him being healthy and him being able to play every day and play at that level that we hope he can play at is a significant upgrade to the team. And it was something they were really missing last year.
It really is. I mean, he came up in mid-May in 23, and I think he missed most of September with an injury. So, it's a compressed part of time, but he was really the best position player on the team that year. There's not much argument. So, yeah, and I guess, you can call him everything you want. If Elly De La Cruz didn't exist, we would be so excited about Matt McLain. And I think even in 23, we would have been thinking a little differently about Matt McLain because it was always, to me, Matt McLain he was playing as the best player at the time on the team, but yet you knew Elly was the most exciting, right? I mean, there were two different variables there, and I don't want to give away Elly for anything. So like that, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying if we only had Matt McLain and he was healthy even last year at all, it would have been like, okay, this is our next hope, and it's just that's the way it goes. But hey, got some news this last week. Just updating some spring training type stuff. Today they tied 3-3. That's kind of a bummer, right? They played Arizona, and yet again, because I had somebody come up to me at church the other day and talk about how good they looked, and I'm like, it doesn't. That's a score because he was talking about being. We were at a Bible study. He's like, oh no, they won again. They won again. I said, Ted, it doesn't matter. But we look for some of the little things, I guess. But throughout this week, they have played. Yesterday was a huge day, right, against the Angels. McLain went 3 for 3 with 2 doubles and a homer, and Elly De La Cruz was 2 for 3 with another long ball and a double that kind of looked like a triple, but I guess it bounced up and hit the batter's eye. Again, it's spring training. Results aren't that important, except it is exciting to see. I guess, what have you thought so far as you've seen both of those guys really hit the ball well?
Hitting the ball hard, that's results don't matter so much. You never know what the other team is trying to do, what the other pitcher's trying to do. You don't know what the batters are trying to do. I mean, they may be failing. They may be going up there trying to hit the ball the other way and just are out in front of it and pull it down the line or something. You don't know. And so the result may end up being good, but it may not have been what they were trying to do. And so when we say results don't matter, that's kind of what we mean. We mean that it's not that we don't want the guys to succeed. It's not that we don't want them to win. I mean, winning builds confidence. So there's certainly nothing wrong with winning. It's more that you just don't know what guys are up there trying to do. You don't know what the pitcher, a pitcher may come out and his only goal that day may be, I need to work on the top half of the strike zone, whether it's with fastball or, playing my curveball off my fastball or whatever. And that may be all he's trying to do. And he may only be throwing 2 pitches when he normally has 4. And he can, guys can get a better read on him when he's doing that and all that stuff. So you just don't know what's going on in those situations. But for Elly and for McLain to come out hitting, well, first of all, to hit the ground running in spring, at the start of spring training, at least creates good feelings. Now, whether or not they can maintain that through all of spring training, and whether or not they can carry that into the season, remains to be seen. But it also gives you some feeling, like with Elly, it's clear that he's opened up his stance a little bit. And he's trying to make some adjustments so he doesn't strike out as much. They've talked about that leading into the spring. Chris Valleca had talked about that. That's what they had been working on. And so for him to have immediate results from that, at the very least, is some validation for the work that he's put in the offseason. That, hey, he's going in the right direction. Now he's probably getting, it very well could happen that over the next week he, goes 1 for 12 with, 5 strikeouts or 8 strikeouts or whatever. In those situations, the results again still do not matter. It's a question of what am I working on? How am I making adjustments to the things that I've changed? Hopefully he just keeps hitting home runs though.
I was listening to MLB Network Radio this week, and Jim Duquette was talking about being the Mets general manager or being in the front office there, and I couldn't believe it. He was talking about how the ownership wanted him to have a winning record in spring training and win ball games because it helped the gate. And maybe it did back then, or maybe even today it could, I guess, if the guys were looking really impressive and the news reports coming back look good. But man, that had to be hard for a baseball man to keep hearing that, like when he's like, it's spring training.
Well, and of course, the Reds they're in a weird situation because they had all that energy of 2023. Mm-hmm. And then last year, obviously, was a very disappointing season outside of Elly and outside of Hunter Green, Nick Martinez. But Nick Martinez wasn't, quote unquote, the future that we were building to.
Right.
And so, you had McLain missing. You had Lodolo basically missing. Graham Ashcraft fell off. Alexis Diaz is disappointing. CES was basically nothing and then got hurt. And so you had all of these disappointing things happen that kind of killed that energy. And then to bring in a new manager, a manager that's had success, and to have guys coming back that you would hope would have been the nucleus of a successful 2024 season. There's something to be said for building that energy back up. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that it's the solution. I would much have rather that they went out and got a guy that, you thought was going to hit 40 bombs this year. That would have been a better solution. But with the roster that they have now, with the guys that you are, that they've basically crossed their fingers about, to have those guys come in and look healthy and have some success, it kind of starts to build that energy up. And from an internal perspective for the team, that energy can help drive you to push yourself a little bit farther. It was certainly missing last year. I don't think anybody would deny that last year's team, even with the excitement of Elly and the success that Elly had, he was just one man, and it wasn't a continually thing that, a thing that would continually build on itself. So, my long-winded rambling answer here is that, there's something to be said for building that cohesive energy and kind of bringing it back to the team, and maybe at least starting off on a positive foot so that you can kind of grow as a team and maybe develop yourself a little farther than maybe the projection systems maybe saw.
Yeah, I think energy is definitely a must, and it's good. And knock on wood, if you can stay healthier, certainly throughout the rest of spring, that matters so much. But it's a different thing when you're talking about energy versus wins and losses. Right. So, that sort of thing. And last year you thought, Jonathan India was still here. You thought with Candelario and CES and Marte, who you didn't know was about this time last year, you found out he was going to be suspended.
Yeah.
You thought you had too many infielders last year, and then it turned out you really didn't have enough. And so now this year, but if you told me that all of a sudden Gavin Lux is kind of like, well, where are you going to put him? And the depth they have, even in the infield specifically, especially even for guys that could be backups or swing guys that could play multiple places. I like this depth. I don't think even in the 2012 in that time, the depth was near as good as far as those infield positions.
I would say the front line is probably not as good as the 2012.
Yeah. Sure.
But maybe, the depth. So there's not as much of a drop off from your front line guys to your next level. Now, again, Elly goes down, McLain goes down again. those are the two guys I would say. If either of those two guys go down, there is kind of a drop off.
Sure.
But it definitely. Last year, I was, there was some frustration because it's like you got all these young guys that are kind of piling up on, in each position. Obviously, the injuries took care of everything.
It did.
And injuries almost always do, So it's nice to have that depth, as you said.
Yeah, I mean, if you put an Espinal and a Lux on the 2012 team and said these are your bench guys, I mean, and certainly Joey missed some time and Frazier ended up playing some first base that year, and that really got him going. But yeah, I just, apologies to the guys that were there, but they weren't as good at players maybe as what you're seeing here. But you're right. I think Elly and McLain are going to be the big keys and the foundational pieces. And other big news this week, Matt McLain played against his brother, Sean, in an actual spring training game. In a story on MLB.com by Mark Sheldon, Matt McLain was quoted by saying that the two played each other 3 times in college, and Matt was at UCLA. And Matt says, I was undefeated in all such games. And he told him before the game, he said, if we win, it counts. If not, it's spring training. And I was out for the game anyway. So, again, if you win spring training games, I guess we could say it counts. And if you lose them, you could say it didn't matter.
Right, exactly. That's the beauty of spring training because it doesn't ultimately count. So you can act like only the good stuff matters.
Right. I had my 9-year-old ask me the other day, what's a grapefruit league, Dad? It doesn't really matter, but it's just what they call it. The Reds won that game against the Dodgers 8-1. So Matt McLain's still undefeated against his brother. I believe they share a house there in Arizona, so that's kind of cool.
And what that game showed me is that the Reds were better than the Dodgers as long as the Dodgers didn't play Shohei, Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, and didn't have any. Well, they had Glasnow pitch, so they still had a good pitcher.
That's right.
And then they had 3 relievers pitch in that game back to back to back, all of whom probably would have been the Reds' closer this season if any of them were on the Reds.
The attention goes to Shohei, obviously, and Freddie Freeman and some of those guys and the amount of money they make, and bets. But the stockpiling of relievers that they've done and starting pitchers, they have 9 starting pitchers basically.
Yeah.
But the stockpiling of relievers, and you're right, like how many of those guys could close on 18 to 20 of the other teams?
Right. Yeah. The pitching depth they have this year is ridiculous, especially after what they went through in the postseason last year, where they had to really lean on their bullpen heavily in the postseason. Blake Snell, what is he? Their 3rd starter, maybe 2nd starter? I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know the entirety of their rotation, and I don't know where Shohei, where and when he ends up fitting into that rotation. But I'm pretty sure he's not starting the season in the rotation.
No, they're talking more like May. Yeah, where he starts really.
You're gonna add a guy that could be a Cy Young winner to a rotation that already has multiple guys that could be Cy Young winners.
That's right. So yeah, you're right. And again, I remember when I was in college. You might enjoy this. I was at Ohio State, and I went to a game started by Steve Paris against Kevin Brown. Mm-hmm. Kevin Brown made more in that start than Steve Paris did for the season. He made like $255K to $250K, the league minimum. And I came back from that game, and my journalism 201 class, we were asked to put together a long, more in-depth study type of an article. And I did a huge dive into finding out all about salaries and who made what, and I used that start as my foundational piece of the story, and Steve Paris won the game that night.
Yeah.
So and that's the thing. I want to get to that in a little bit because there's a few questions. Actually, there's something else. Let's do that. I want to get there before we go to our theme of the night, and that's to discuss statistics and maybe which ones could tell us something about the possibility of the Reds having a good season. But one thing I wanted to bring up, and I'm not picking on Charlie Goldsmith. He does a good job. He has a nice feature in Cincinnati Magazine this month about Elly De La Cruz. And I was reading it as I was preparing for the show this week. But something stuck out toward the end. And he rightly pointed out that Elly is becoming a leader. I think that's true, right? I think that's what Francona wants out of him, and I think Elly's taking a little more, seriously as he gets a little older. And obviously, he's one of the better players in the league, let alone on the team. But Goldsmith talks about the Reds possibly making the playoffs this year, and whether if they do make the playoffs, they could come up against a Juan Soto or a Shohei Ohtani. And here's the quote that kind of jumped out at me, and I kind of wanted to say, wait a minute, I want to get your thoughts on it. He said, and if the Reds make the postseason and end up in a matchup against Soto's New York Mets or Ohtani's Los Angeles Dodgers, De La Cruz is going to have to try to match their star power. And in baseball, it just doesn't work that way, in my opinion. I mean, can Elly come up with the bases loaded in the ninth inning down 3 and hit the game-winning grand slam? Yes, he can. But Barry Bonds and Ken Griffey Jr. were unable to single-handedly win World Series, let alone really even – I mean, Bonds went there, once, I guess. So Ohtani and Mike Trout were teammates. All right? These were the two the best players maybe in the game at the same time, and they never even made the playoffs. I don't think they did while Ohtani was there. I know Trout made it once. So I guess that's my question to you. Like that sentence kind of was alarm bells for me. If they make the playoffs, it's going to be because more than just Elly did something. In fact, it's going to be because pitching came together a lot better. But also, even in that playoff series, it's not incumbent. It's not like Michael Jordan having to have the flu game. I guess where do you land on that?
I mean, I think from a moment to moment perspective, yeah, you're exactly right. But I think there can also be if you read a little more into what he's saying, or if you want to read it in a way that is a little more generous to what he said, I think you could say that having the ability to not let the moment overwhelm you is probably more what he means. So whether or not he's going to carry the team to a series win is different than saying, you don't want him to basically lay an egg, to go up there and strike out, 12 times in 15 at bats or something. He's got to be able to be the man, even if it means just doing enough. Reds fans will remember, we remember like the 2010 and 2012, where there are certainly moments that stick out in those series, and there are moments where guys did not come through, and it wasn't Joey didn't come through. It was, Scott Rowland failed. Jay Bruce couldn't get that hit that we need. So it's not letting those moments pass, and now if he comes up every time with a chance to win the game, you want him to win the game at least once or twice, right?
Yeah.
But he's not going to come up every time specifically with a chance to win the game. So you just want to feel like, hey, this guy in this situation meets the moment. Yeah.
And I guess also one thing I'm not fond of it, but it's one thing I remember often is that Joey Votto was basically playing on one leg in that 2012 series. And I often wonder what might have been.
Right.
He had no power. He was even when he came back, he was a singles hitter the rest of the season.
What, he hit like one home run after he came back or something like that? It was something low.
He was on base for something like 77 doubles, and I don't think he had more than 5 or 6, that last month and a half. But so I guess at the end of the day, I agree with what you're saying, but it just stuck out to me. I was like, wait a minute, it's not, and that's
not fair. I'll tell you this much: it's not fair to say that he has to be Ohtani.
But
especially in the preseason, especially
in front of me, and I know Ohtani hit the big World Baseball Classic home run off his teammate, or no, he struck out Trout, right?
Trout, yeah.
So he came up big in that moment. But at the same time, I don't remember Ohtani's World Series that well this past year. I know Freddie Freeman hit that laser, but I guess my thing is, the problem is at the end of the day, teams like the Dodgers, they fill their bucket more full. If we want to look at it that way. And, Barry Bonds gets criticized for his lack of production in the postseason when he was with the Pirates and then the Giants. Ted Williams famously, right? But they didn't even have playoffs back then. He only got to the World Series a time or two. It's just interesting to me because baseball is not the same as basketball. And I guess that was the point. You know, that's landed on it. So
I think people look at base in Cincinnati. They look at it more like football, and and they think the star, they think Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, whoever, usually have big games and big moments, right? And it's just, you just don't have that option in baseball as much. You have to have the fortune of coming up with the situation that can make you a legend, and then coming through, obviously.
That's true.
But like, you think about some of the big moments in Reds history, Johnny Bench hits that home run in 72 to tie the game. I bet, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but Johnny Bench played a lot of postseason games. And I bet he did not come through every single time.
Right.
But, you give yourself one or two of those moments and suddenly you're a playoff legend kind of thing.
But a guy like Elly doing as well as we think he's going to do this year, and if they do make the playoffs, it's going to be in large part because a lot of he did, but then there are Jim Leyritz's and Chad Curtis's and people like that come through in the moment, and you win because of everybody. And
right. And I wasn't trying to say that Johnny Bench, my argument wasn't against yours so much as to say we remember the moments when those stars do the things they do, but it sure helps when you have a lot of those opportunities.
Yeah, he had more opportunities than
anybody in Reds history, at least.
Right. As far as catchers, yeah. Well, Joe Oliver did hit the double in the 10th inning to save Tom Browning.
Billy Bates scored a winning run in a World Series game.
That's right, against the Cheetah. All right, let's move on. And again, I wasn't trying to bash Charlie, but that sentence jumped out at me, and I thought, wait a minute, that's hyperbole, maybe a little bit, but. And listen, the Mets have a history of paying guys and then they don't do anything. So Juan Soto has to prove that he can even get there in the first place. So because they didn't do anything for their pitching staff except for pay Frankie Montas way more than the Reds did, and he's out for the next 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So here we are. All right, I want to have you on this week specifically to talk about some stats and just kind of almost like talking about spring training, how winning doesn't matter, and then we just talked about stars don't always come up big in a baseball situation. There's just so many variables to a 162 game season. And this isn't the same, but I was thinking about it like Ohio State football this year, their best two offensive linemen was their left tackle and their center. All right. Seth McLaughlin, the center, and I'm blanking on his name right now, the left tackle. But he got
the wrong guy.
He got hurt, but they both got hurt. If you would have told anybody who followed Ohio State in like late September, by that point, ooh, this line's looking a little creaky, and these two guys are really good. And the center ended up winning the Remington Award for the greatest center in the country, and the left tackle was going to go probably in the late first round. But they both got hurt and missed the rest of the season. You'd think the season's over. So, and that's not stats driven, but there are times when other people come through, I guess is my point. So we can't make a declarative statement that Elly has to hit 40 home runs or they're not going to make the playoffs, right? That's not what we're looking for. And certainly you mentioned the Bengals a moment ago. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Trey Hendrickson had all-world seasons, and that team did not make the playoffs. Mm-hmm. So there's that. So I guess if you could kind of intro me a little bit to some things you've been thinking about kind of some ideas on what do the Reds need to do. If this happens, then they're going to have success. Do you have any thoughts on those?
My first thought, and it was my thought back in November as to what their biggest need was, they need to hit more home runs. Mm-hmm. In the ballpark that they are in, where did I had the number up here real quick, and I don't have it right now. What did they finish? They were 19th in the league in home runs, and in the ballpark that they play in, that's frankly just not acceptable. They haven't had a player hit more than 25 home runs since 2021.
Castellanos and
I don't know who did it that year, but it's been the last 3 years. I think Elly has the highest home run season. What, he hit 25 last year?
Yeah, I think he did.
Yeah, he hit 25 last year. So, that's just not. You you can't play in the ballpark that they play in and have that, be a continuing trend offensively. I think Elly is going to, 35 maybe. That would be if I had to bet some money and they wanted me to pick a number, I'd probably pick 35. I think maybe, McLain, Stevenson, Steer probably are in the 20s.
Mm-hmm.
A guy that they could really use a boost from, a guy that has that power potential, is CES.
Right.
If he can just start, frankly, if he can just start hitting some bombs,
right?
I think he's got 30 home run power. I don't know if he's that kind of a big league hitter though.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's got 30 home run power. If he could hit 25 home runs, that's a big boost from a guy that gave you nothing last year. So that's really what we're looking for. You're looking for guys to outperform what you got from the same spot last year. I think McLain's going to do that with India. I think McLain's going to be a better player than India was. And India was a fine player last year. But they didn't have a second guy. Tyler Stevenson was kind of a second guy, but he was also a catcher. And, catchers just, they're going to tire out. You can just bet on that. They need somebody that's, number 2 on the star chart. And that's probably McLain. He's probably the guy offensively, at least, that is most likely to be that guy. The other thing that McLain's going to bring, and I put a lot of the weight of this season on McLain's shoulders, and it is not fair to do that, surgically repaired shoulder. It very well could happen that the shoulder is a problem throughout. We saw it with Joey. Remember, Joey had the shoulder issues. Now, Joey was actively injured at the time.
Sure. Yeah.
So he was always trying to play through that. But not having a fully strong shoulder can definitely just screw up your whole season. But to me, of all of the prospect guys or all of the young guys, he was number 2 on that list in terms of potential. And so if he can play to some level above what we got from India last year, I think he's better defensively. I think he's a better offensive performer. He'll provide a little more speed on the base paths. I think he just, in general, outplays India on most of the items on the stat card. So I think there's a lot there. But the thing about it is if you add a player like that to your lineup, it makes it pushes everybody down a level of what your expectation is for them.
That's right.
And that can help guys. That can take somebody like Spencer Steer and say, hey, look, you don't have to be the number 2 guy in the lineup. You can be just the guy that we need to come through occasional. You can be our Jim Leyritz. You know what I'm saying? So it allows guys to maybe take a little pressure off of themselves, having another star in the lineup. I just really wish they had somebody that was, again, if they had someone that was like a 40 home run guy that you felt like this guy's a good bet for 40 home runs, they need that Greg Vaughn influence in their lineup. Somebody who can come in and be like, hey, I got your back. I'm going to hit you some bombs. You don't need to worry about that kind of thing.
The funny thing about that summer of 99, I remember all summer we went to so many games driving down from Columbus, and we listened to Tracy Jones on the way back home, and callers calling in, he's only hitting 235. It's like, come on. And I remember Tracy talking about he's there to hit home runs and ribeye steaks. And that's it.
It's everybody's got their role. And, Elly can be your everything guy. Matt McLain can be your almost everything guy.
Sure.
But having 2 of those guys will definitely help other guys be like, okay, I can just be, this can be my role. This is what I'm doing. This is where I fit in on this team.
In an ideal world, Austin Hayes and Candelario would be your gap-to-gap hitters. And if enough guys hit enough more home runs, listen, and Candelario would hit – a healthy Candelario would hit home runs in Great American Ballpark that weren't home runs at other places that he played. But even then, you're saying they're going to hit more doubles and things like that. I want to read Andrew Williams. He was one of our viewer mail guys, and I want to read his because what you were saying is spot on with what he's trying to say too. He said, "Here's the deal: the Reds play at GABP and have failed for multiple years to take advantage of that park. You have, capital have, you have to have an offense that can bop a little when they call that place home. I know people like to bash the quote-unquote new style of play, but if the Reds want to win, they have to simply hit the ball hard. Barrel percentage matters, exit velocity matters, and I'm going to say it, home run total matters. Hoping Elly, CES, and McLain can carry those numbers well. Maybe some contribution from Ty, Steve, Hayes, and Steer." So, yeah, that's it.
So last year, 39% of their runs were scored via home run.
Okay.
Actually, in 2023, it was 40%. So it was a little higher. They don't need to be. You don't need. I'm not saying they need to be dependent on home runs. I'm saying they need to take, like he said, take advantage of the fact that you can hit home runs in this park, and you need to hit home runs in this park because you're going to give up home runs in that park.
That's right.
And so you need to balance that out. You can't be giving up home runs and still trying to squeak out runs on the other end. It's a losing formula.
It is. And to your point, to add to a little more, I mean, the first base production last year as a whole, not picking on one guy in particular, but as a whole, it just wasn't there where you need it to be. And there's going to be some other questions later, like because of his shoulder. And actually, I questioned during the year last year because Steer just didn't seem, after that first 3 weeks or so, Steer seemed a little off to me. And I wondered when he did injure the shoulder, because then he comes to camp and then the report is, oh, well, this was bothering him at the end of last year. Yeah. And I wondered, like, is he going to be at first base pretty much full time if he can't throw? Are they going to DH him some and put somebody else at first base? That's going to be interesting to see who gets to play.
Thank God they have the DH, though.
I know, and I never would have said that 10 years ago.
But, first base, third base, the corner outfield, that's where they have to improve there.
They do.
And whether or not they've got the players to do it, I don't know, but they have to improve in those spots.
They do, and I guess it seems like they have an abundance of infielders in a DH spot. Like those 5 spots, they've got 6 or 7 guys. Because Espinal, I don't want Espinal to have to play every day, but he proved he can play a little bit, so that's good. But
I was going to say I think they're going to end up quasi platooning Lux and Espinal.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that they're going to start as a full platoon. I don't start every day kind of a thing, one or the other. But I think they mesh well, on either side of the plate. Yeah. Espinal is probably more of your defensive replacement guy. But I think having both of those guys on the roster, I think the intention, I have not talked to anybody about this, so this is just all of my looking at the roster. The intention is those guys are going to kind of split time based on matchups.
Mm-hmm. I can see that, but what position?
Third, second. It just depends on who, because guys are going to need days off. Guys are going to need they're going to have to be flexible. Espinal played some outfield last year too. Yeah. So it's not so much like I said, I don't think it's going to be a pure these two are our third baseman and one's going to play versus lefties and one's going to play versus righties, so much as we like this matchup for Lux today, so we're going to find a spot to put him in the lineup. We like this matchup for Espinal today, we're going to find a spot to put him in the lineup. And then there'll be the guys, your bats off the bench, depending on if you're facing a lefty or a righty later in the game.
That brings up another question then, because with Terry Francona coming into camp and saying, Elly's my shortstop and McLain is my second baseman, he seems to value, and I've heard other baseball people talk about that, like the guys up the middle, you want the reps. Even and Cora was talking about that with the whole situation they got with Bregman up in Boston, and saying, well, we need to have we're going to have different guys play second base. Yes, it's going to rotate a little bit, but I want more consistency is what he was saying. And I think you think that's what Terry Francona is saying by just cementing these two guys here.
I think I kind of also got the feeling that he was saying, these are my guys.
Yeah.
We're going to live and die with these two. Not to act like he agrees with me, but that's kind of what I read into that a little bit is that, I mean, he had the quote about, telling Elly that he wants him to be the best player on the best team in the league.
Mm-hmm.
To which the obvious response was they're trading Elly to the Dodgers. But anyway, the point being that I think he really wanted to give those two guys the confidence to say, hey, look, this is not, I mean, I don't want to say your team, but this is the team's going to ride your back.
Well, and for me to go back to 1999 again, left field was Greg Vaughn's and center field was Mike Cameron's. Right field was Jeffrey Hammonds and Michael Tucker and sometimes Dimitri Young. So it's like, I think I see what you're saying. Sometimes a guy that's your spot because you're the guy. Right. And not even just the guy at that position. You're just the guy on this team.
Right.
Okay. I'm starting to meld into some of the viewer mail questions. So do you have any more stats-driven thoughts or specifics you came up with?
We'll see what comes up.
All right, let's do it. Brandon Kamick, as part of viewer mail, says, I love the pitching depth, but we're relying on health, bounce-back seasons, and big steps forward on offense. Hard enough to rely on one of those, let alone all three. And that's true, and that's the whole hope is not a strategy. Chad Dotson famously has said for years. I'm sure he wasn't the first. But the funny thing about this hope springs eternal stuff that we were talking about earlier, I mean, you see McLain come in and hit so well and hit not even just get hits, but hit the ball hard. CES, that whole best shape of his life. You've heard that about him. He's coming off a pretty tough injury. And you think about Austin Hayes, and 2023, I think he was an all-star that year, and then last year he had some real issues, like beyond baseball health issues. Mm-hmm. So it's just like that quote-unquote if. It's there for several guys, but that whole idea of squinting, you don't have to squint too hard to see it.
Well, I'll say this much. Squinting's all we've got at this point.
It is.
I mean, we can't, the roster's not going to change at this point. The guys that we have are the guys that we have. And so there's nothing wrong with trying to look optimistically at the team that's on the field. I mean, it's part of being a fan.
Right.
It's part of being hopeful. It's lousy to not even be hopeful at this point in the season.
That's right. When would we be?
I know. So I'll say this much. We had a lot of excitement in 2023. And the players that made that year exciting, a couple of them were out pretty much all of last year.
That's right.
And a couple of the pitchers were hurt last year. So yeah, we're hoping for health, but you're hoping for health every year anyway. The Dodgers are hoping for health. With all the depth that they have, they could still be destroyed by injuries. It could happen. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with hoping for health. Yeah, I would love to have a better roster than we have. I would love to have, more bullpen depth. I would love to have, a couple more big bats in the lineup. But we don't have that now. So now we got to hope.
Let me ask you an offshoot of the hope thing, because nobody's really talking about Candelario.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a reason for that. I don't know. But where do you see him fitting? If he's healthy this year, is he close to an everyday player? And, or is he? You said the roster is what it is. If everybody got through spring healthy and you get to the last day of spring, could you see him flip for something else of need? Even a smaller outfielder or something like that.
I think his contract is not tradable.
Okay.
It's only 2 years, I know, and maybe there's a team out there that could really use him. I think he's overpaid for the player that he is. So I would guess probably not traded. I think he's 5 games a week at least.
Okay.
That first, third, and DH, I think there's going to be a lot of moving guys around
Mhm.
to hope, to where they feel like this guy fits well on this day kind of a situation. And Candelario is probably because he can basically play all three of those spots. Candelario is probably a higher percentage of the starts, unless he's terrible, kind of a situation. Lux is probably similar, I think.
Right.
I don't know if he'd play first. I honestly don't know if he's ever played first, but I think he's also that kind of player that he'll get more starts than probably the only guy that I could see doing something to push his start level up would be CES.
Okay.
Like, I think CES is because he's still that potential.
The power, right?
Right. But he's still a bit of an unknown.
Mm-hmm.
If he's a healthy and comes in, and is ready to hit, he's a little bit of an unknown and can do something. He could come out and hit, 8 home runs in April. Well, now suddenly he's probably starting a lot more.
Yeah. Right.
I don't see Candelario, Candelario, I think maybe we get a little bit better version than what we got last year, but I don't think we're going to get a lot better version.
Yeah. He feels like if he could produce at any level toward what he has in the past, he feels like a very, very, very poor man's Castellanos. But I think because of when they signed at the same time, if you think of Castellanos and Moustakas, right? Like, I don't want Candelario to end up Moustakas 2.0, right, where you don't even run him out there and you end up paying him to go away.
Well, I'll say this much: his attitude's better than Moustakis's was.
Seems that way.
Yeah,
it does seem that way. Joey Goditza, he often chimes in. He says, "Does Lux have a sufficient enough arm to play third base?" You mentioned, don't know if he's played first. I know they said he could play first, and I think he did a little bit with the Dodgers.
Did he? Right.
But he said, "Do you view him as a majority owner of playing time at third base? Could you ever view him that way?" I can't speak to his arm. What's that?
I don't think he would be a majority third baseman. I think he's more likely to move around.
Yes.
I don't think defensively. I mean, from what I know of him, I shouldn't speak so definitively, but from what I've heard, his arm is not strong enough to be a everyday third baseman.
Well, and he came back from injury last year and was the presumptive shortstop on the Dodgers, who have all the money in the world, and they had to move Mookie Betts there.
Right.
So
he played second. Lux ended up playing second base.
Yeah,
which tells me that he probably doesn't have enough of an arm to be playing a lot on the left side. But I think he'll see some time there.
So I guess we already talked about Tito saying what he did about Elly and saying what he did about McLain. But if you put a blindfold on and you didn't know the age or the whatever, and you just saw their capabilities, would it make more sense? And I know it's not going to happen. I'm just asking the question. Would it make more sense for Elly to play third and McLain to play short and Lux to be your everyday second baseman?
Elly was pretty good at shortstop last year.
No, you're right. He was. And everybody harps on the air. His beyond errors were very good. You're right.
Right. And so you're asking me to ignore what I saw there. Mm-hmm. So I'm fortunate enough to work with a very good former shortstop.
Yeah, that's
and the point that he has always made to me, and he knows a lot about playing shortstop, so I'm going to defer to him, is that because of their size, shortstop will wear Matt McLain out a lot faster than Elly De La Cruz.
Sure.
Mainly because Elly can leverage his size to make some of the throws and make some of the plays that McLain just doesn't have that opportunity. Because he and I, in 23, he and I talked a lot about, I would ask him a lot about McLain playing shortstop.
Because they did initially, because India was healthy.
Right.
And he came up and played short. Right. And when Elly came up about 3 or 4 weeks later, he played third. And it was when India got hurt that they shifted back around.
Right.
And then India came back about the same time McLain got hurt. So that worked itself out. And India went back at second and Elly was still at short.
Right. And and he would always say that he thought that Elly had a longer term future at shortstop than McLain.
Okay.
That we both, because I kept saying to him, I was like, at that time, McLain was clearly the better defensive shortstop.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't disagree with that, but he thought that 150 games of McLain playing shortstop would probably not go well for him.
So that almost sounds like what happens to catchers naturally. Like it's just a wearing down.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. Like I hadn't thought about it, and Barry's not a huge guy. And
no, but he's bigger than the Pee Wee Reeses and
he's bigger than Matt McLain, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, that's true too. But even for decades, shortstop and second base was a defensive, two defensive positions. And guys, I mean, that's why Pee Wee Reese and Phil Rizzuto in the Hall of Fame. I mean, it's like
right.
The numbers.
And there weren't guys built like Elly playing shortstop. That's a
right.
That didn't really come along until Cal Ripken started doing it.
Cal Ripken, A-Rod, and yeah.
But Barry's point is that the position will wear Elly out a lot more slowly.
Okay.
Because of his ability to leverage his size.
I hadn't thought about that completely that way either. Now, I think maybe fundamentally in 23, there was no doubt McLain was the better defensive shortstop at the time. But the things we saw Elly do, the ground he would cover.
Right.
And even the other day, the Cowboy, Jeff Brantley was and Tommy Thrall were saying during one of the games that Elly wasn't at short at the time. And it was like, oh, that's your mind's eye sees a ball hit over there. And I think Espinal was playing short at the time. He's a good defensive player.
Right.
But it's like, oh, well, Elly would have been gliding over and been maybe camped under that one. So,
as far as I can tell, the only player that would likely push Elly off a shortstop is Arroyo.
Wow. Yeah.
And that is dependent on Arroyo being able to hit well enough to hit in the big leagues.
Sure.
But from everything that I've heard from people, Arroyo, and that doesn't mean Arroyo will. When Arroyo comes up, he may have to change positions.
Yeah.
But he is the only one right now that's close, at least, that has that defensive ability that would necessitate putting him at shortstop.
Yeah, I guess. So then, do we presume that Marte starts at AAA?
That would be my guess. I haven't heard anything definitively, but that would be my guess.
And then I just get really worried because if you're telling me Spencer Steer can't throw,
right,
that means he's playing first or he's DH or he's on the injured list. I don't know which. So if you're telling me that CES or Candy at third is a little worrisome for me.
Yeah.
Defense.
I agree.
And maybe that's why you see Espinal play more. I don't know.
Well, that's certainly why Espinal's on the roster.
Right.
He may not start, but he may be coming into games.
Yeah.
Especially with lead. If you got a lead in the sixth inning, I could see, especially if whoever was playing third just batted. Yeah, I could see Espinal coming in to play third.
Candy worried me at first. I mean, I just when he was, and maybe he was playing banged up, and he finally just went on the injured list and was already hurt a little before. I don't know, but
I mean, he made some pretty bad plays.
He did, and there's nothing worse to see a baseball team playing poorly and not winning games, and then to see multiple of those kind of plays, like in a given game or a week.
Right.
It just feels like it's just compounding on top of itself.
Yep.
All right. Last one. Kyle Kapler asked, is anyone else concerned about the depth in center field? They're in big trouble if Friedel gets hurt. And this goes back to what you were already talking about. The outfield situation last year going in was not great. And then it got worse because Friedel played more games if you look at his bubblegum card than I think a lot of people realize. He just missed such a big chunk early when they played their way out of it.
Right.
That when he came back, and I don't think he ever, and I think he may even broke his hand after he came back from the first injury or something like that on getting hit by a pitch, if I remember right.
I think he missed a couple different spans, if I recall.
He did, because he only came back for a small amount of time and then he got hurt again. But Friedel, the funny thing about Friedel is I asked Chris Garber this a few weeks ago, or about a month ago, like, he actually got an MVP vote in 2023, but his WAR, he had a good WAR that season, and he put up a really good season. And you're gonna need that with the way the outfield is right now. I guess the question answers itself. Yeah, especially if Friedel gets hurt, then
right.
is Will.
Well, this question could have been from 2023.
It could have.
We're on year 3 at least now of having one guy that can play center field.
Right.
You can't, no offense to Will Benson, but he's not a center fielder. No offense to Stuart Fairchild, but if he's playing regularly for you in center field, defensively, he's okay.
Mm-hmm.
He's got some issues, but he's not, a disaster. He certainly can take some home runs away.
In a smaller home field too, like the American, not near.
But his bat is pretty limited.
Yeah, it's not. It's
so they just don't have. I'm looking at the roster right now, and I don't know that there's really anybody that I would want to see play in center field regularly.
No,
if Benson or Fraley or somebody like that has to play a game so that Friedel can have a game off, that's one thing. But yeah, it's pretty disappointing that they didn't find another guy to play center field.
It went around all off season. Our favorite former GM who does some writing for The Athletic, Jim Bowden, thought and said that Luis Robert was coming to Cincinnati at least 6 different times.
Yeah.
And then when they reported what they were asking for, or somebody from the Reds let it slip, it was like, oh, that's why they never got him.
Yeah.
Where were you on that, though? Because he's had one good year.
I wouldn't have given up a ton for him.
Right.
I think he maybe would have been an improvement. It's so hard to tell with people coming from the White Sox because they're such a dysfunctional organization. It's really sad coming from, a fan of the Reds to be like, that organization, but they're such a dysfunctional organization right now. They got rid of Jason Benetti.
Yeah.
And so, it's so hard to tell, are guys just checking out on them? And you just don't know. You don't know if some guys were playing hurt, checked out, or just were bad.
Yeah, it's kind of the opposite of the NBA over the years, where a guy would score 22 a game for the Timberwolves when they were terrible, and you just you knew if he played on a good team, he would maybe average 8.
Exactly.
It's the opposite. But that's what 162 games. When you lose 100 plus games every year, right, it's got to just completely just wear on you.
Right.
Yeah, I wish in some ways they would have landed him or someone like him, but I didn't want to give up. Burns and Arroyo or something like that. That's ridiculous.
Right.
Even though I'm more on the side of let's try to win now and that kind of thing.
Well, and I don't think prospects are off limits. It's just it's what you're getting back for them, and I think there's too many question marks around Robert to be giving up guys that are, especially guys that are close.
If you gave up Louder or Burns, it's like, well, they could be in the rotation next month. I doubt Burns will be, but yeah,
I don't know with the way they talk about the stuff that he has. Who knows?
It is exciting, and we haven't even talked about the pitching tonight. Right. I think the depth of the starting rotation is way more impressive, and I think they can do a lot of things. So I'm not that worried about them. I think you're right. They could have done a little more with the bullpen depth, but I'm pretty happy with a lot of the moves they made there too.
Yeah, I really wish they had been able to get a secondary closer.
Okay.
Whether or not he actually closes games is a different question, but a guy that is one of those nails shutdown guys. They don't really have a second guy, and I'm not completely sure that Alexis Diaz is even the first guy.
Yeah.
And so it would have been nice to have that, but not that it would have been easy to acquire, but that's what I felt like they really needed out of their bullpen.
But I don't know who you're thinking of other than Diaz, but I just don't. Getting Rogers like they did, to me, if you had to make him your closer, that kind of defeats the purpose of bringing him. You know what I mean?
Right.
He's such a good piece there in the later innings without having to be the closer that I was like,
Well, no, I'm not. And like I said, it didn't have to be somebody that was a closer. for the Reds so much as they need somebody who is Quoser-like.
Sure.
And
Okay.
I don't know that Rogers is necessarily that guy.
Yeah, I don't think he is. So yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying is I think that, one of the three guys that the Dodgers threw against them, for instance. I mean, it's
how would Kopech look about now, right?
right.
All right, Joel, I so appreciate you joining me. I thought the topic this week lined up with your expertise. Tell the people kind of where they get. Are you anywhere now? As far as do you have an online presence that you make yourself?
I'm on Blue Sky, but I'll be honest. I like the last month or so I've been a little quiet there, just because I've been busy with other stuff offline. But once the season kicks back up, I'll probably start posting stuff again there.
And will you be beside Sadak and Larkin and Welsh and everyone?
Just Sadak and Larkin because they're the ones doing the home games.
Home games, yeah,
just home games.
Okay, all right. Well, we look forward to the name drops. Whenever we hear your name, I say, "Hey, I've talked to him before." It's a pretty cool moment to have that, and just thanks so much for joining me. I'm excited. I know a lot of folks in Reds country are too. So, looking forward to getting closer to opening day. Late Night Reds will be Sunday. I believe right now I may be filling in as Tim will be up in Cleveland. He's going to try to make it happen, but we'll have to see. Ben Brown, as always, will be there as well. I'm going to talk to Chris Garber and maybe Chad Dotson as well for their second edition of the Big 50, which is coming out here in a week or two. We're going to let you know where to get it and what all's in it and all the exciting things that, reading the first edition to me, and I know you've been in on some books as well. It's really fun to see the research for me anyway. I really enjoy that.
I just want to point out that it took them 2 books to get to 100 and I did it in 1. So,
well, they didn't even do another 50.
Oh no.
No, I think they rewrote some stuff. I think they wrote about Elly. But I think they maybe combined a few things and then added a few others that they.
So it's just 50-ish.
50-ish, yeah. Well, you got to 100. What was yours?
100 things Reds fans should know and do before.
That's right. That was one of. Yeah, that's yes.
No, okay. It's 13 years old, so it's outdated at this point. But
they couldn't even. What's at GABP now that wasn't there 13 years ago? There's probably a lot.
The second scoreboard.
That's right. It came out in 15 with the All-Star leading up the All-Star game.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I don't know what they've done, if they've done anything in the offseason to improve the stadium, but the second scoreboard video screen still looks more vivid than the main one. And so I was like, are they ever going to replace the main one? And so it'll be fun. I'll be there with my son on opening day. Looking forward to it. And hopefully you enjoy yourself there too. And thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Tell your friends about us. Like and subscribe wherever you can like and subscribe. Maybe drop us a review on iTunes. And for Billy Bates and that cheetah, so long, everybody.